Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast with me, Ben Talon, illustrator and creativity coach, founder of the Creative Condition, artist and writer. I bring 20 years of creative industry experience and a lifelong love of creativity, a fundamental pillar of human happiness, to you through ongoing personal exploration and the shared experiences of others. You'll get a nourishing mix of creative industry professionals and people far and wide using creativity in ways that can take our learning to the next level so we can maximise our unique blend. The show's been supported from day one by Illustration X, a tremendous illustration agency representing a shining global roster of illustrators and animators over at illustrationx.com. The music for the show is by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on all good streaming services. And for everything else, for my coaching, resources and inspiration, head to thecreativecondition.com.
Creativity and creative quality must be visibly important, You must feel it in the walls. And I think good work does matter. And I think details, ambition, so we share the same ambition. But within, I guess, these convictions, you also need freedom as a creator to express yourself.
Today I'm joined by co-founder of Kurppa Hosk, Thomas Kurppa. Kurppa Hosk is a branding agency based in the United States and Sweden, and we're going to get into all aspects of creativity. We're talking about Thomas's introduction to creativity through electronic music, his love of that world, the clinical nature of it, and how that transferred into the design he began to make. We're talking about creating magic and inspiration and the room for freedom and self-expression in an agency with over 200 people. How the hell do you do that? Well, Thomas is going to let us in to just a few secrets about that. This is the Creative Condition. How are you doing, guys? Welcome to the show. This is the Creative Condition podcast, episode 301. I am your I'm not a co-host. Thomas is a co-founder. I'm your host, Ben Talon. I hope you enjoyed Austin Kleon on the 300th episode, and if you haven't listened yet, go back and do that immediately. It's a belter. What else? Well, it's been a heat wave here in the UK. Nobody can hide now from the climate crisis. It's here, it's in our faces. We all need to be acting. I am feeling more resilient in terms of my anxiety around that. I had another dip around it when the 36-degree days hit. And you might laugh if you're overseas. I know that 36 degrees is commonplace for some of you, but it's just not routine for us here in the UK. It's another warning that, this thing is real. It's been real for some time. There were warnings about this from scientists to governments before I was born. So that alleviates some of that kind of guilt that's been passed on by corporations about what's your carbon footprint? Individuals, we all have to take part. Yes, we all have to minimize that stuff. I refuse to use AI in any way other than what is completely necessary, very occasionally for that reason, the energy use, until someone can prove to me otherwise that it's not resource hungry, then I won't do it. But we can't take the blame. There are bigger things at work here. We have to come together and we have to do something about that. So, I saw Dion Kitchen, an illustrator who's been on this show a little while ago now, talking about shifting from her current kind of freelancing to supporting organisations who are doing good work around this. That's one way you can do it. I think unity is something in collaboration, and I think we all have to make a change. I'm not going to, I'm not here to talk about that exclusively today. But I do think it's here now. It's screaming in our faces, and I think we have to use our cause, our driving force, the work of our directing minds to contribute to something that is additive to the world, not resource hungry, not just going about business as usual and then complaining when things go awry. Because this week, the kids were off school for 2 days. I had to juggle that with my wife. We both lost a combined day each of our work time. The kids lost 2 days of their education to this because the school isn't equipped with air conditioning, so it wasn't safe for the staff and the kids to be in those hot rooms. And it's all very alarming, but I think instead of freaking out and not looking at the news, which is what I've done for too long, I think we all have to act. We have to write to our local politicians. We have to make work that references this stuff. Or, you can go deeper. This is my cause. Creativity is my cause. Creativity is going to be needed as a part of the solution for any problem we face in the world. And that's why I put so much time into doing this podcast. There's very little money on the table. I get sponsorship here and there to cover the costs. We'll get to those wonderful supportive sponsors in a moment. But other than that, I do this because I'm passionate about creativity. I see the magic in the world, the way it illuminates people, the way it fills people with cause, brings them belonging, and grants them optimism. Those three things are vital if we are to tackle the climate crisis. That's why I do this. I do episodes directly around the theme. I talk to chemical engineers in renewable energy. I think of Yasmin Ali. I talk to doctors who are fighting for more people to be heard from marginalised backgrounds. This is another big part of the climate crisis. People are not being heard in the countries that are perhaps the least involved in the problem, but they're getting the backlash of it in hot countries. It's criminal. We can all do something. If you could take one small action today after listening to this, or change one little thing in your practice to be more contributory to the climate crisis, then I think we all benefit from that in the long run. And if you are feeling the despair, now don't get me wrong, I've felt it. It's been a major part of my own mental health troubles in the last few years, but I'm finding cause as my way back out of that hole. If you are feeling that, I suggest you go and read the books of Hannah Ritchie. She's on the Creative Condition reading list. You see that at thecreativecondition.com. Read It's Not the End of the World. It's phenomenal. She's got a new book out now that I haven't got around to reading yet, so I won't recommend until I have, but she's brilliant. And if you maybe don't have the time or you want something more immediate, go and listen to her on podcasts. She's guested on plenty when the book came out. Her work is brilliant. She's more of an optimist. She finds balance in the middle. She talks about the urgency of the problems we face, the biodiversity crisis, climate crisis, air pollution, deforestation. There are 7 major problems she looks at, but she looks for the cautious optimism in each of them and the progress that we have made. So she's a tonic. Positive News is also a tonic. I recommend subscribing to the print magazine. It's beautiful, really well designed, great journalism, very uplifting. Makes you want to contribute something and gives you a sense of optimism and hope. We all need that. Anyway, that's my piece on that one. Let's get into it. The sponsors for the show: Illustration X, founding sponsor, illustrationx.com. Beautiful artists, illustrators, animators, you name it, they're on there. illustrationx.com. Foilco, one of my older sponsors, come back into the frame. They're doing amazing work up in the northwest. Foilco.com for anything shiny, stunning, considered, and zero waste. Paradiso Institute. Love these guys. I went to the inaugural Paradiso Festival in 2025 in Merida, Mexico, in Yucatan. It was unbelievable. The energy there, the way they did things differently, the point of view, everything they stand for, which they are now trying to channel into helping brands, agencies, people in the creative industry to find their bold voice for the same reasons I talked about at the top of the show. We are at a crossroads. The sea of same is rising along with the real seas. We need to stand for something. We need to be bold and brave in our creativity. They're here to help you do that. paradisoinstitute.org. Last but very much not least, there's a war in Ukraine and it's horrible, but the creative community are fighting like fuck. They are brave, bold people, and they are supported by the Ukrainian Institute, who are sharing their work, shouting about them, getting them work overseas to keep them going. You can help that cause with a little share, a commission, whatever you can. ui.org.ua. Right, I'm not going to waffle on, but Kurppa Hosk are a wonderful agency. For decades, strong brands have been at the edge for leaders who understand the commercial world. And for the last 15 years, Kurppa Hosk has been at the edge for leaders who know what it takes to build a strong brand. You can read the rest of the bio, but that gives you a flavour of what they're about. How do you manage that across 200 people? And Thomas's origin story is something wonderful. So we're going to get into all that today. You can enjoy that. And the last thing I wanted to drop, if you want to work directly with me, I work with as a creative coach. I have 6-month programs, 12-month programs, and a one-off intensive deep dive opening session called The Pit Stop, which serves as a one-shop stop if you want that. But we can also use that as the intro to a longer program. I work with a number of clients that you guys will know. Helping them to elevate their game, being a thought partner, giving them strategies, helping them to design talks and tell their story. I've written biographies for people, working with Hector Ayuso, founder of Off Festival and now Paradiso Institute. I'm working with Pablo Honey at the moment, the executive creative director of Automatic in New York. Pablo's going to tell his story very soon with his new book, The In Between, and it's incredible. It's been a joy to book coach him on that. I can help you in many ways. So check it out, thecreativecondition.com/coach. You'll also find the section there for story coaching. But that's enough of the business. Let's get into this beautiful conversation with Thomas Kurppa from Kurppa Hosk. Enjoy.
I guess we're maybe shared about a few of us in this industry, the feeling of restlessness and, the willingness to do something new or, move into something different all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that curiosity is kind of innate and I think important to foster, isn't it?
Most certainly. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've always been kind of interested in, since we're working a lot with identities, they can also continue run for a very long time, depending on the size of the company. I'm usually very excited and involved in the beginning when you create the concept, but having over the years, it's been harder for me to continue because it's we have so many great designers that are actually, refining and putting everything into systems. But for me personally, it's always the first spark, when everything is possible, everything is unknown, you can do almost anything you want. And I think that phase is so fascinating, I think, when every door is open, basically. I guess like you, when you're starting to write a book or something, it's just like a blank page in a way.
Yes,
And,
it can be beautiful and it can be terrifying, but I think it's utterly important to really let things, I don't know what the word is, to ignite things at that time. As a leader of an agency, particularly with so many people, am I right in thinking it's over 200?
Yeah, I think we're just crossed 200, so we're just above that now.
How important is it for you then, as a leader in an agency of such size, to make sure that there is freedom and confidence to play in those early stages? Because I hear so many complaints now in today's world of speed and efficiency and scalability over craft. So what role do you play as a leader in stepping in and actually leading by example in that regard?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think I had my fears over the years, and I think when we started Kurppa Hosk, we never had a plan of, we're going to create an agency or we're going to become this and that. It was just like a coincidence, since we won this pitch for a telco company here in the Nordics, which we didn't expect to do. So we were just up and running. We didn't have any company number or anything. And it started just with me and my co-founder Måns and my sister, who's also a graphic designer. So she was involved in the beginning. And I think at that small, when you're that small, it's so much easier because everything is surrounded by yourself, So it's almost like your expression or your ideas that travels into different identities and, work that we did at the time. And over the years, we've been growing organically. So I think when we hit like 20 people, and I said to Måns, my co-founder, like we can't really be any bigger than this because we're going to lose everything, in terms of control. And he was persistent. Like we're very different, me and Måns. So he's more on the business side, with all the relations and it's been brilliant at that. And I was protecting the integrity in terms of creativity. So we call it business artistry still, but that was the foundation basically of that. And I think we tried because we got more assignments. So we said like it's hard to turn down these requests. So we hired more people, but we always been very good at, I think, to identify and attract the right talent. And at Kurppa Hosk has always been like the creative directors today, since we have this system, me as a chief creative officer maybe are more responsible for the vision and the where we actually going, and questions like this, conversations like this is super important. And then we have this guardrail, I would say, with creative directors that have been going in our school basically. So we never picked anyone from the street or from another agency. They always been a part of and also shaped, I guess, the culture that we have, and also the common understanding around what is good and what is not good. What do we believe in terms of quality? So I get that question quite a lot, since it's quite unusual, especially here in the Nordics. I would say that an agency of that size uh, can produce decent work. So, but it comes down to people, that we can make sure that we have extraordinary people that can maintain and develop us as an agency, and also not just my way of looking at things, and also adding new perspectives. But I think it's super important to have that, almost like creativity and creative quality must be visibly important. You must feel it in the walls. And I think good work does matter. And I think details, ambition, so we share the same ambition. But within, I guess, these convictions, you also need freedom as a creator to express yourself and do what you think is right for this client. So I think that's something that we've been working with, to have the same ambition, the same freedom. And also, you said play in the beginning. I've been talking for a very long time, but it's a subject that interests me. And I think play is, I usually talk about that as well, because I come from the music industry, started off as a DJ and a producer of underground music. And I see so many similarities between studio culture, when were some friends just producing house and techno, and you were allowed to do mistakes or try weird stuff. And usually those mistakes or attempts that are a bit silly sometimes can turn into a beautiful hook or a beautiful thing in a song or a track. And I think it's the same with graphic design, that you shouldn't be afraid of, even if you're new, a junior designer, you should be allowed to express yourself and come up with ideas that are, to a creative director that maybe has 20 years of experience. And I think that balance is super important to make sure everyone feels safe.
Well,
So
that's the glory, isn't it? You've got the experience of yourself and the people running the company, but that operates in isolation if you don't have the people who can bring something completely fresh and a different point of view and a different language. And I suppose then it's about giving them the floor and the confidence to express themselves in such a manner that then you're able to see and grab hold of that and then shape it in a way that they might not otherwise have without you. Always collaboration. I think creativity is a shared condition.
yeah, it is. It is certainly. And I think that mix between young curiosity and also maybe they have another approach to graphic design than people in the 40s 50s have. And I think we can always steer an idea so it comes we can actually, it becomes also like what do you say, like functional, it's going to work. But it's important to make people express themselves, because I think design and illustration and all these crafts are an extension of yourself. You can never leave yourself if you're not imitating, but I think that true inner voice is so important to keep, and also make sure that we can embrace as a company, so it doesn't become a machine or a brand, just a brand. We're individuals, and I think it's super important to make sure we help people to really continue doing that, what they did in school basically.
Yeah, I've been working with Pablo Honey. I don't know if you know Pablo's work. He's the ECD at Automatic. I've been helping him write his
Mm.
book recently, which has been a fascinating experience. And I can't remember the Spanish term for this, but there's a term, and it translates to leaving a piece of yourself in the work. You know, feeling such connection with the work at any given point that you leave something in there that is resonant, and it might not be literal. You might not be able to pick that out as the end user, but it gives
Mm.
it a unique life.
Yeah.
I have to believe that when you mentioned going above 20 people and how do you keep a handle on that? I forget what the number is. I think it's around 150 that they say we can have in our close network of friends and family before it becomes something beyond that. At
Mm.
that point, at that point, you need a mantra or you need a binding thing. I think that kind of resonance, bold creativity, that willingness to play an experiment, but also just to leave that element of passion in the work, is that one of the tools that makes the difference, that makes for success at that scale?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer, but I think at least from how I have been, reasoning is kind of that we try to make sure that you can leave an imprint. You need to be very close to yourself and what you think are, the best way to execute. And also we talk a lot about surprise, since also now with AI and everything is becoming almost like, the sea of sameness. I think it's super important to be able to keep that moment of surprise, to try to push things and do the unexpected at times. Sometimes it's hard because it's the conditions are not there. But as far as we can, we talk a lot about surprise and surprise ourselves as well. We talk sometimes about using new techniques in the wrong way, in a way that we're not supposed to be operated in, or stuff like that. So we and trying to also look at other fields like art or space, or that can inspire us in the work. So we're not just looking at these platforms that are just pushing out the stuff that are hot right now. So I think that is something, surprise has been, at least for me, it's key. And also the restlessness, I think, is also a way of handling that. You can surprise yourself and you can get excited, because it's easy to fall into, you're just doing what you've always been doing. And I think that's the trap that we're trying to avoid as far as possible.
Yes, because as humans, we naturally fall quite easily into habits and patterns, don't we? So it's about remaining self-aware enough to challenge that at all times.
Yeah, it's hard, but I think, especially now since AI has moved in, it's so easy to replicate. Everything looks polished in a way, so it's becoming harder to stand out. And I guess for you, I mean, illustration as well is just like, it's super hard to find that original ideas. And I think we need to remind ourselves why we're here. So I think it's going to be, you know, execution is going to be, commodity. And I think what's going to be rare is more like taste, direction, originality, and also cultural sensitivity, so you understand also why you're doing things, the ability to choose, and also maybe to um, say no to things. So I think we're going to be, it's going to be super important for us to move on, you know, with experience and culture. Friction is, I think, also it's super, but to be human, what is the unique fact that shapes us as humans. Intuition, and also almost like human contradictions, I think is going to be important moving forward, because I think we haven't seen, it moves so fast now. So I think it's going to be interesting to follow, like what's AI is gonna do with the industry. And I think production is going to be the first thing, but still, you know, we talk about it a lot in the studio. What makes us human, you know, And if we think in history, at least for me, like the heroes, like the directors, the photographers, the musicians, producers, I was always interested more in the humans, more in the expression sometimes, So I think that is also something I think we always gonna miss if it disappears, the human aspect of someone who's expressing something. So it's gonna be I think it's gonna be interesting to understand like the future currency of creativity. What would that be? What I'm willing to pay for, basically. So it's a
Yeah,
lot of
and
questions that arises right now around that.
I think we all have a part to play in that too. It's very easy to allow ourselves to feel insignificant, particularly when we're remote freelancers or illustrators, like you say, in a craft that does feel in some ways under threat. And I think that we all have to be living our own story consciously and trusting that origin story and those passions.
Mm.
You mentioned play. I'm very interested in. I'd like to go back into your story a little bit because I love your transition from music to design. But first, I'd love to jump a little bit even earlier. Like, did you have the freedom to be bored in childhood, and was that an important factor in your curiosity?
Yeah, I don't come from a like a none of my parents had a creative profession, and I grew up in the middle of Sweden, and Sweden is kind of interesting because half the south part of Sweden is basically where all the people lives, and the north part, we call it Norrland, which is basically Northland. It's always grim up north, and I was born in a small village, like Twin Peaks, in a way. So I was never like exposed to design schools or because everyone was working with traditional, what do you say, like occupations or traditional types of work. So creativity came for me almost like it's sneaking up on me in my teens. I discovered by accident. I was right, on the bus home from school. A girl that was a few years older had this Walkman and I just had a listen, and it was Kraftwerk, Computer World, and that was the first time I understood like I never heard anything like it, and it was totally different from anything I've heard before. So I started to investigate more around like electronic music. I saw all the covers. It was with the red shirts and the black ties from Man Machine. I started to because at the same time Depeche Mode came, all the new wave scene. So it was just like mind blowing, and I that was the first time I understood like design can also be an attitude. It was so different. So it was packaged in a way that just made me so interested in expressions and sounds, and since this was before internet, we just had a few magazines in Sweden that a few journalists basically that was writing about electronic music and what happening in London and Berlin and the summer of love when I was a bit older, and techno and house came. It was the second revelation, almost like. So I started to took the train to Stockholm, bought some records, started to DJ, in this community, small village. And if it was, considered as very bold and new in Chicago and Detroit, and in my hometown, it was just wrong. You couldn't play that music because it was so different. So it didn't work out. But I met some like-minded people from the closest biggest city. So I moved there after my graduation at high school, the day after, and we started a studio. And together we could afford to buy samplers, mixers, all the effects. So we started to produce, and I didn't have a clue. Hadn't touched the keyboard. So it was just like so curious and in just spending endless amount of hours in that studio. to be able to produce something. And one day we got a record deal, so we could start release underground music, and it was just like amazing because over these years I've also been organizing parties, raves and stuff. So I did a lot of flyers, and suddenly we needed record covers. And I also at the same time, because I think these late 80s and early 90s it was such a fantastic time to be in that age, because it was exploding in terms of like, of course you have Peter Saville in the order and all of that, but you also had Mark Farrow for Pet Shop Boys and Designers Republic for Warp. So that was also like, I was so inspired. I want to do as the same for our record labels, and I bought my first Macintosh. Everything was possible basically. So it was just a matter of how much time we had to do all of these interesting, amazing things. So the heroes were there, and everything was possible. So we just pushed out graphic design, and suddenly I just realized that I was spending more time on package music for my friends than producing music for myself. So that was how my transition into graphic design. But it was so similar, I think, because it was also an attitude I want to express. And I think especially like Designers Republic, the way they treated letter shapes and typography was just like, also because I think techno for me was so industrial, was so cold, which I fell in love with. With our craft work as well, there was emotions, but it was not like romantic. It was something else. And I think when I suddenly experienced like graphic design could have the same, convey the same feelings, it was amazing, just to understand, okay, you can actually treat type like that. It doesn't need to be functional. It can be serve another purpose, So I started to, since then, in the early 90s, Illustrator has been my closest friend, just to push boundaries in terms of typography. And type is always relevant as well, as long as you want to communicate something. So that was, how everything came about, basically. And later on, I understood, okay, this could be actually a profession. Graphic designer is not a advertising guy, or you could actually do experimental abstract work and people pay you for that. So that was in a way, like, no one served that. It was just like small steps and the meetings with people. And I also think the times, in the 80s was so experimental and open, anything was possible. And I think you could do anything. And I think the combination of, you didn't have social media, you didn't have any, it was just like records, music, and pure love for craft. So you're not so, the noise wasn't there. It was just pure, I think, those decades.
And that generates movements, collectives, that gorgeous energy, that magic, I think, when you belong to something. You talk about that time in the studio and just, I mean, countless examples, being in freezing cold, old industrial units, but the beginning of something, the beginning of trying to be an illustrator and just saving up some money from an old job and then having this, taking that plunge and just being in there with those other people who were also at the start of a journey. That's just pure magic to me, and it always will be.
Yeah.
And I've been lucky enough to interview a few people important around that scene. You mentioned Peter Saville. I got to interview Sean Ryder, who was of course involved with Factory Records and all of that. And I remember Sean telling me that one of the biggest breaks that they had in their career was being thrown into a studio far too early, before they should have been anywhere near a record studio. But Tony Wilson was more interested in the fact that they were a little gang and they had this raucous energy than any of their actual technical ability at that stage, and he trusted that something would come by them being in that space with that playful
Yeah.
energy. And look what
Yeah.
happened. Look at
Yeah.
the pioneering way of writing and lyrics and everything else. And then Don Letts, who was intertwined with reggae and dub, but also the punk scene with the Clash and a clothing shop. So it spilled into fashion and fashion into music and music
Mm,
into pop punk, which was an attitude. And I just think there's something about just immersing and not being so precious or second guessing things to not just get in there and have a go.
mm. It's super interesting. I think you mentioned like movement, and I think because I tried to explain, to younger people today, because now everything is sorted into genres, and there's deep house, is micro house, is minimal, and then you have the hip hop scene that is so far away. Sometimes they collide, but it's so, what do you say, like pure. And I think in the late 80s, it was in Sweden we call it like the new, it was kind of like the new dance music or something, because it was everything. It could be hip hop, it could be hip house, it could be, and this do it yourself attitude was more of an attitude more than you were actually a good musician or you had all the right competence or expertise. It was just like an attitude that was so fascinating. And I also think it's generated more originality in a way because you didn't have a blueprint. You didn't know what was right or wrong. It was just like experimentation all over. And I think that was defining so much of that period, both in terms of graphic design and music. So I'm so happy that I've been experiencing that because it shaped me in so many different ways, I think. Because attitude is coming back to me, like it's always, for me, it's not, graphic design is not so much about storytelling narratives. For me, it's just expressions, the instant feeling you get from something. And that is always, it's always like you can choose between different attitudes more than right or wrong. So you're aiming for an attitude more than anything else. So that's been following me since then, basically, to try to find that attitude that I looking for, basically. And I think, as you say, that movement was filled with so much of that attitude, different, temperatures, of course, but still amazing time.
Yeah, that kind of attitude transcends discipline, and I think
Mm,
that then frees you up to try, you know, different connections and different ways of fusing things. I remember interviewing Andy Sandoz, who was president of DNAD at the time, and he was frustrated because I think this was 2016, and he said we're at this moment where we're starting to get AI and we've got all these incredible technologies and all this abundance at our fingertips. But he said to me, "Where is the banshee whale? I'm not seeing enough collisions. I'm not seeing enough interesting collaborations and people." And maybe it's abundance versus scarcity. I think scarcity has a way.
mm,
You mentioned there in your childhood, I had the same experience. My cultural horizons were limited to about five things in Yorkshire in the
yeah,
late 1980s, which I'm so thankful of now because I really got to
yeah,
immerse and go deep in those things and find the people who also shared that. And that would necessitate physical movement and friendship and but also need to find it and to work for it.
mm,
So maybe there's something about the sheer abundance that has a paralyzing effect. That's probably too general of a statement because I'm sure some people use the abundance very well, but I think it's a danger if we're not careful.
yeah. It's and I think of that quite since I have kids, and it's almost like their sources of dopamine is endless. And just looking back to my childhood in terms of creativity, there was a lot of times I was just bored. Nothing happened. We had two channels on TV in Sweden. We could see cartoons twice a year. So it was a really boring time, but it also made you invent your own stuff. Curiosity was just, you needed to, and I think play and the creativity comes from boredom sometimes, because you need to do something. So when you're just getting all these things served, it's a danger in that as well, I think. And we haven't seen the consequences yet, I think, of, because they are almost like, what do you say, like test persons in a way, because we don't know what this is gonna, since, the real introduction of the smartphone and the social media came around 2013. So I guess we're gonna be aware of the consequences quite soon, because I think it's not only good things that comes out of this, endless loop of stimuli. So
Yeah,
that's also an
yeah,
aspect, I think.
I think so, and I think you mentioned it earlier. The noise, the sheer noise of it all. I'm noticing people going back the other way now, which I suppose is inevitable because there's this. I sense just a general social fatigue, a digital fatigue
Mm,
with the sheer amount of communications and noise. And I think that I'm starting to see breakaway, smaller private communities happening again now, and people starting nights and things like that, which I think is going to be a good thing. But but there's only so far we can go. Like you said, we need the human, and I think that it's all well and good saying we can have anything at the push of a button, but who really wants that? Well, people want to work for it and have that relationship to make great creativity happen. So yeah, I think we're at a real tension point. It's very interesting, but I do believe
yeah.
that as creators, we each have an individual responsibility to to make good decisions in that regard. Is that something you'd agree with?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as personally, I'm super afraid of you know almost like, I always want to embrace the new, and I think that has also been a part of our success, that we're not standing still, and we also been super curious about AI and what it can do. But I think we need to handle it with be careful how we use it, and find our own way to make sure that we can also um, produce the best work we can. Um, so and I mean, AI is amazing in terms of, I think, in medicine, for example, environmental questions or issues. So it's not only something bad, but I think, especially in the beginning, I think humans are trying to find a way to navigate, which is natural. I think it's just like so overwhelming, and no one really knows what the future holds. So I think together I believe that we together will find a way how to balance that. That's my hope, at least. Like, we find a way where humans still have a place, and I'm sure that, as you say, relations is a part of the creative process. And I think the best work over time, if you look back in history, has always been, you know, when people meet each other and talk and, share experiences, and the clashes that occurs, when you're coming from different backgrounds, you have a different way of looking at life. Or so a lot of the most iconic work is a result of that, I think, because you also have life experience, you have different references, and of course you can do that maybe with AI, if you regard it more as a tool, perhaps, more than anything else. But it's just going to be super interesting to see what happens. And yeah, not just like refuse, or being too old school. I think, for us at least, is to embrace it, and make sure we can find our unique way in this.
Yeah, yeah, much like you would in any creative process, I suppose. It's bringing in that
Mm,
backstory and that those personal passions, and like you say, if it's handled with care in that regard, then it could be as good as any technology previously. So yeah, but it comes back to self awareness, doesn't it? And
yeah, I
and
guess.
also knowing what you represent as a brand and as an agency, as a collective too.
Mm, yeah, very much so. And we talk about it constantly, I guess, just like increased the last year, just because in the beginning everyone was, curious, and now we're using it in different ways, like mock-ups. We do tests. It goes super fast to test an idea, for example, or to show a client how it can look in IRL. So and it becomes better. At In the beginning, type was just horrible, and now it's starting to understand type in a different way. So as a friend, creative friend, where you are in control, I think it's beautiful, because you can do a lot of different things. But as you say, I think that balance is going to be super crucial for us humans in general. I think just like and also in terms of entry level jobs, how we gonna make sure that we don't lose a generation of young creatives is also an aspect, I think, not just in creative fields, but in general, something that I can see starting to happen because AI can do a lot of that work. So I think it's almost like a philosophical discussion on humanity in large, at large. How are we gonna move in this as humans? So it's not just letter shapes; it's bigger than that. But it's just the world is a very fascinating place right now. I think in many
Yeah,
aspects.
I think so. Yeah, I was quite interested to see the basic income scheme for artists in Ireland. I don't know if you saw about that, but it
No, I
was
haven't seen
very.
that. Mm,
It was a pilot scheme initially, and it was, I think it was about 2,000 artists were given a basic wage, something around 350 euros a week,
mm,
to support their practice, and the economic kickback, not just for them personally, but for the national economy, was great. It had a really positive stimulating effect because it gave them enough to concentrate on the work they wanted to make, and brought about some very interesting results. So
yeah.
it's since been rolled out on a bigger scale. They're looking at it as something as a
Mm,
national thing. And I
yeah.
find that ideas like that very interesting. And I think, like you say, with the entry level threats of automation, I think bigger thinking in terms of that and supporting artists is going to be quite important to go hand in hand.
Yeah. It's going to be super important. And I think I also seen like Finland and Italy is also experimenting with like kind of a guarantee income or something.
Yeah,
So yeah, that's going to be interesting to follow, like the politics around, you know, how we're going to handle AI and the consequences. It's just like fascinating.
it is. Um, your personal typography, I think it's wonderful. And do you what role does that have on an agency level? Do you notice that inspires people to tell their own story, to make their own personal work? Does it, is that important, or is it just something that you do purely for yourself as emotional creativity?
Yeah, it started as a personal obsession, I think. It's almost like I always been interested in graphics more than photography or colors, because usually they are a big part of a program, and it's nothing wrong with that. But it's just like I think since also when I started design school, looking back at Wim Crowell, all the Dutch scene, the Swiss, Brockman and Ruder, and total design in Netherlands, is always been very close to me. And I think the graphic design in its pure sense, it's actually just vectors, and I love that. And I think we started off quite much around me, so it became natural that we had a portfolio that was quite heavy on type. And we did in the beginning. We also did a lot of art projects, for galleries, and where you maybe have more freedom and it becomes more relevant, perhaps, to communicate on posters and stuff. In an identity, sometimes type can we usually divide it into heroes and dynamic elements. So heroes are identifiers, basically. So usually, if not all of the cases, you have the logotype that are a true identifier that should stand for a very long time. It's becomes, you can live it for forever, like Chanel, for example, or a Nike swoosh. And then type can also be a hero in terms of it could be an identifier. So when you see a headline, for example, you can identify the brand just by a few words, and you don't even see the logotype. So it becomes like a hero element. And I sometimes I draw similarities to like a hook in music. So I don't know, for Blue Monday, you have that kick drum, and you have that melody that is so obvious. and the production, of course. But you have a few elements or hooks in a song, or usually the most iconic work in music always have that special sound, or it could be a production thing, but it could also be a melody. And I think identities in graphic design, all graphic design, I would say, also need a hook. So if you look at posters that are iconic through history, is a very obvious hook, because you remember it. You can almost see the silhouette. And for me, it's always graphics, that are, it's not that often it happens, but, photography is usually just like trying to evoke emotions more on a general level. So I think we're usually, since we work a lot around, and I really pushed for, we don't need, we need to work with the ingredients, and then we can make the recipes. So it's almost like the ingredients are the identifiers and the recipes are the experience of the brand, the production side, how you're going to, the tone of voice, if it's going to be, we need different temperatures for different situations, but at the core is always the hooks or the ingredients. So I think that is also, that process has led us into focusing a lot on the type and the senders, logotypes and symbols. So I think that is maybe defined as in terms of an expression as well. So it's kind of comes from me, but everyone that is being attracted to what we do seems to be like-minded in that sense. So it's become almost like what do you say, like something that we don't need to talk about. It's just like how we do things. So I think maybe more than agencies in general, perhaps we're focusing on that perhaps a bit more. And I've always been, I'm almost like uninterested in photography and colors. So it's just always obsessed by the heroes and the ingredients. So maybe that's a long answer, I guess, on the question, but it's how I think we still operates in a way.
It's perfect, and again, it keeps going back to this theme of self-awareness. But it's being bullish enough to admit that and to eliminate things, and to be at peace with not being either good at everything or interested in everything. To know where you stand and to drive based on those passions and then work outwards from that is very valuable. And I think it helps us to create a strong brand, for want of a better word, in the broadest sense of the term. Again, it's tapping into something that is an energy. We said it earlier, an attitude. There's a great story about I interviewed Rob O'Connor, who was at Style Rouge, and they did a lot of Blur's early art direction in the 90s.
Yeah.
And there's a story about when, do you know the Park Life album cover with the two greyhounds? So that was that was a stock image, and I love that because it wasn't about finesse or perfection. It was or even great photography. The story was that Damon Albarn was walking home from a recording session one night, and he walked past one of the bookmakers, one of the betting shops here in the UK, William Hill, and for years they had this iconic design where it was all just panels, almost Brady Bunch style, panels of snooker balls and greyhounds and golfers. And he walked past that shop late one night and called up Rob and said, "I think I've just found the solution to our cover. It's in this betting shop window. It's these greyhounds. It's this snooker." So they tried iterations of different sports. Ultimately, they just landed on this one stock image of the greyhounds because it just captured the attitude and the energy of the time, that everything that went into that album. So from a graphic design point of view, when you understand that about who you are and you're brave enough to push that forward, to trust it, I think great things happen.
And I maybe I upset a lot of people that are into photography. Photography is a great, field, of course, but it's just like me personally, that are not spending too much time around photography. And I guess like in terms of the greyhounds, it's almost also like, again, it becomes a hero, and it's almost like capturing the time, which a cover needs to do in a way, like to capture the moment, all the songs, and also the fact when it was produced. It becomes almost like a package of exactly them. So I think identities can't rely on photography in the same way, because you live for much, you can go on for 50, 100 years. So if you look at Nike, for example, if you look at I don't know, ads from the 80s with Just Do It. They have the same heroes. They have the swoosh, the logotype, and they have Futura, you know. Same way, the same elements they use today, but photography has changed because they need to capture current times, you know. So I think when we talk about heroes and dynamic, it's also like dynamics needs to be iterated, needs to be changed, you know. They need to develop because photography is usually a discipline where you can capture the contemporary or the current time, basically, where graphics has a longer lifespan, you know, type as well. We use types that are 100, over 100 years old, you know, still typefaces. So that's fascinating. I think your question in the beginning was like bespoke type, perhaps, or more characteristic type, which I'm super interested in. Um, it's also could be also harder to become in identities, harder to make sure they can stand, you know, the time, or you know, so it doesn't feel dated in 10 years time. So the experiments I do is perhaps I don't have those prerequisites, or I don't have the demands on them, you know, as we have on identity. So you need to think in a different way sometimes, because you need to make sure we can move on, we can develop the brand, but we have a core, you know, a backbone, a soul, a visual soul that gonna be able to follow, you know, the brand for a very long time.
Does that feed your hunger creatively and just curiosity in general? Because I know from personal experience, and I help many of my coaching clients with doing that stuff without putting the pressure on it, like you say, and
Mm,
just to connect to the energy flow, the thing that
yeah.
makes you, you know, excited to start the next morning. It might not be directly related. It might be that you take that energy and apply it to a client project where there's no freedom for that kind of typography, but actually
Mm,
just in doing it and connecting to it, I find it just brings about an irreplaceable energy.
it does. It's amazing, and I think for me, it's so important to have that space, you know, where I can do whatever I want. It's almost like painting, or I don't know, like reading, or for me, it's just a way to make sure I feel mentally healthy in a way. But sometimes it can also become ideas that we can use, or I can use later on, you know, or it could also be small things that I can bring into something else. So it's always like a library that continues to grow, both, you know, um, like in, what do you say, like both on the computer and in the head. I think it's just like amazing to continue to be confronted by your own ideas or explorations. So I think I need to do that to not, you know, stand still, or I think it's a way of maybe convincing myself that I'm still relevant or something.
I think I think it's utterly crucial. Personally, you know, I for the longest time I spent a lot of time writing short fiction when my twins were born. We were in
Mm,
lockdown, and then there was this really, you know, interesting social circumstance that triggered a lot of ideas. So it took me a while to build the confidence to try fiction, but when I did, I
yeah.
loved it, and it never really had an end use. I would make these books, and maybe 50
Mm,
people would read them, you know, but actually, it's opened the door into writing biographies now with prominent designers, and doing story
yeah.
coaching, you know, because again, it's bringing the walls down, and it's, you do it without condition, but as it tends to happen, things emerge very holistically
Yeah.
from it, and that's beautiful.
And then when you start writing, I guess you haven't done that professionally before. So it also becomes quite, I guess, like uncertain, or it's like a territory you haven't been in before. So I think that can also give you a different voice than if you're an experienced writer and just do it for, you know, another book. So I think
Oh,
it's,
absolutely. I think there's, you know, I meet people who have a chip on their shoulder because they haven't been formally trained in a certain discipline. And I always remind them of how beautiful that is, because they come with such an untrained voice in the best way. Whereas sometimes
mm,
when people have been formally trained, whether it's in music or another discipline, they will play by the rules a little too much.
yeah,
And, you
exactly.
know, I have to think that that's the case for you to a degree in terms of your shift across from electronic music and an interest in the kind of machinery of that,
Yeah,
that must have brought a sensibility in your work that was a little fresh and a little different coming from another place.
yeah. And I think also what helped me was the fact, the scene in itself, the underground movement was also, to ordinary people, it was just odd. So it was easier to convince myself, like, they won't understand. This almost like the punk movement. That it's good if you don't understand this, because then we're doing something that is new or fresh. Or so. And also being quite young, I think, is just like everything is possible, nothing can stop us. So a combination of things, but especially I think the movement in itself was very helpful, because it was almost like you wanted to revolt, or this is we were underdogs, or if the parents didn't understand, it's a good sign. So I think that was part of it. And then graphic design, I think, since I was in design school, I was also learning more, teaching, I was educated more. So in the beginning, I was maybe trying to do setting type the correct way, trying to do checkbox on all these fundamental things you learn about graphic design. At the same time, you have the heroes in the background that were, breaking all the rules. So over the years, I guess you also find your own expression, your own way of doing things. You start understanding more of yourself, perhaps, where you're coming from, the diagnosis you have, why you are in a specific way. And I think when you connect all the dots, maybe you can see a pattern emerge. So I think that is also helpful to understand yourself. And I think when you understand yourself, it's easier to find your own voice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you only really get to truly find yourself, particularly creatively, through action, through doing and trying and failing at a few things and fusing a few things.
Yeah, definitely. But I'm fascinated. I envy you to step into a unknown field. So I want to do that more, and I would try that even harder going forward, to do things that I haven't done before, because it's easy to fall into Greyhound Day, or it's just like everything is repeats itself. Another identity, or you're becoming good at it, but it's also, in a way, you need more to get that, what do you say, like kick. So I think sometimes it's kind of refreshing to step into, like, writing a book, or start painting, or do something completely different, or at least maybe you can take some of the experiences you have already, and turn it into, or practice them in another field that are you more unfamiliar with. I think that's a good way of also make sure that you're developing as a person. And
Yes.
mm,
And I think it has a way of rejuvenating the core stuff too. That I found that the times when I've grown maybe a little fatigued with my illustration work have invariably been the times when I've not been doing that, when I've not been experimenting or doing the
yeah,
new stuff.
exactly. Yeah.
When I do, I find that I see new things in my old work, and it just
Mm,
revitalizes it. Yeah, so it's always a cycle. I think there's always an ecosystem to try and establish.
yeah.
Not going too far and wide to the point where you're just scattered and not finding any depth, but just finding enough space to explore. I think so. I heard somebody call it circle of competence, which I quite liked once.
Mm. Yeah, I think you need those perspectives. Sometimes when you come back to something, you see it with completely different eyes. And sometimes you can also say, how was I thinking? I mean, this is not good. And also, like, if I, seen something like an art exhibition a few years back, and I have pictures of it, I can't really understand what really made me stop and really have looked at it, because I have a different perspective today. I think something else is more interesting, or so. The human brain's quite elastic, and there are certain things that are constant, but I think you can also develop into, you can change your mind, you can have different you can get different perspectives of things over time, which I think is interesting as well. Like you can really change without losing your soul, which I think is super interesting as well.
A timeline of its own. Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, I could talk to you all day, Thomas, but this has been a joy. And thank you very much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you, Ben, for having me. It was a pleasure.
Many thanks to Thomas Kurppa for taking the time out of the schedule running a 200 staff agency. Got to appreciate that, haven't you? What a conversation. I hope you took as much as I did from that one, because that was rather inspiring. You know, I want to stay in touch with every guest that I have, because I always buzz after each conversation. It's what's kept me doing this for 11 years now, over 300 episodes. And I thank each and every one of you who has been with me for any leg of that journey. For the long-term people, thank you so much, because it was pretty shambolic back in the Arrest All Mimics days, but I always loved those chats. There was just something raw and real about them, whether it's me or my guests, you know, accepting my lo-fi setup, doing it, you know, off of bins down side streets, as I mentioned on last week's show with Ashley Axios, former designer of the White House administration under Barack Obama, you know, to go from that to then some East London bins, you know, it's just, people have it, people like the change and the transformation and the contrast, I think. So I love it. So thank you, all of you guys, for listening. Please do tell a friend, drop me an email. I'm always happy to hear from my listeners. I love it. In fact, ben@bentalon.com. It helps me keep going. If there's something you've enjoyed about the show, don't be shy. Let me know. Let's have a conversation. Put yourself forward for a show. I'm always open to guest pitches. If there's something interesting that fits with where I'm taking the show, I will have you on the show. Don't be shy. Nothing wrong with plugging yourself. We all need to do it in this world with all that noise out there. Big thank you to the sponsors for the show, of course, illustrationx.com, been here since day one, wonderful illustration animation agency. Check them out, illustrationx.com, for their portfolios and their industry work. Foilco.com, wonderful foiling company, family run up in the northwest of England. Zero waste. They've got an incredible setup at their warehouse, and they make things shiny and beautiful for you right across the board. They do it on the most premium papers with the right partners. They will take care of you. They are professionals. They are wonderful people. ParadisoInstitute.org. Paradiso Institute are up to exciting things. They're about to launch some of their programs, coaching and supporting people in bold, brave, creative leadership for the next generation. ParadisoInstitute.org. And please do check out the Ukrainian Institute, who are supporting the embattled Ukrainian creative community in this horrific time of war. ui.org.ua. That's enough from me, guys. Thank you for listening. Thank you for Thomas Kurppa from Kurppa Hosk. Check out their incredible work at Kurppa Hosk. That's 2ps.com. I'll be back next week. If you want to work directly with me on the coaching, please get in touch. What we'll do is we'll jump on Zoom. No obligation. We'll have a conversation. I'll see if we're a good fit. If you like the look of me, if I like the look of you, then maybe we could discuss how that might work. No obligations. Happy to do it. Very passionate about doing that. For everything else, for all the other free and low-cost resources, the bookshop, the reading list, the 300-plus archive of this podcast, it's all there, thecreativecondition.com. Thanks, guys. Love every one of you for listening. Tell a friend, subscribe, rate, review, the rest of it. Have an awesome week. Stay creative.